Hi friends, welcome to another class. Today macro chapter 4, government budget of class 12. Okay. Now budget, by means of budget, what do you mean? By budget we mean approximate or estimated income or expenditure of any project. This is budget. In our families also we make budget. In our families generally what happens in the beginning of the month, we make some approximate ideas from where we get our income and where we will spend our income. So this is budget of our family. Same thing happens with the government also. Government also make a pre-plan before starting a financial year, that from where government will get its income and where government will spend its income. So the approximate estimate of government income and expenditure is the government budget. Okay. Now, so what we see? We see government budget having two branch. One is government receipt and one is government expenditure. Okay. Government receipt means from where government get its income. Government expenditure means where government will spend its expenditure income. Okay. Now government receipt, from where government will get its income. Now in government receipt, generally government get two types of income or receipts. One is from revenue receipt. Another is capital receipt. Two types of government receipt. One is revenue, one is capital. In revenue receipt, what happens? In revenue receipt, government asset and liability doesn't affect it. Whether whatever is the asset, whatever is the liability, all remain same. It is not affected by the revenue receipt. But in capital receipt, what happens? Either government liability will increase or asset will fall. So first we start with the revenue receipt. Revenue receipt means those receipts of the government which does not affect the asset and liability status of the government. Okay, this is revenue receipt. It is also having two parts. One is coming from tax revenue, tax receipt. Another is non-tax receipt. Tax and non-tax. Tax means those compulsory payments of the public which everyone has to pay to the government directly or indirectly. This is tax receipt. Suppose income tax, sales tax, these all are tax receipt, tax income. Income tax, goods and services tax, GST, sales tax, excess duty, these all are taxes of the government and which a government get from tax receipt. So some of the taxes are direct, some of the taxes are indirect. Okay, in tax receipts also there are two types of taxes. One is direct tax, another is indirect tax. Okay, suppose income tax is the direct tax and indirect tax is GST or sales tax is the indirect tax. Okay, now direct tax means those taxes which we have to pay directly to the government. We cannot shift the burden of the tax. This is direct tax, income tax. The person who earned, he himself pay the tax. He cannot shift the burden to another one. This is direct tax. Indirect taxes are which one? Those taxes where tax is paid by one, but his burden is borne by another. Okay, the person on whom the tax is imposed, he is paying the tax actually, but its burden is borne by another person. Suppose income sales tax. Sales tax is paid by the shopkeeper, but his burden is borne by the consumer. So this is indirect tax. It is paid indirectly to the government. This is directly to the government. These are all the tax receipts from where government the taxes. Now non-tax receipts. Outside the tax, all the receipts are coming under non-tax. For example, fees, fines, penalties, like that. These all are non-tax. Okay, any kinds of penalties, fees, fines, assets, forfeiture of bonds. These all are non-tax receipts. These are outside the tax. Okay. Now, in case of tax receipt, government is not liable to return back anything. But in case of non-tax receipts, government may sometimes provide services or other facts for against the non-tax receipts. So these are the revenue receipts of the government, from where government get the revenues. Now come to the capital receipt. In revenue receipt, what we learned? We learned asset liability does not affect it. But in case of capital receipts, either government's asset will reduce or government liabilities will. In case of capital receipt, either government asset will fall or government's liability will increase. Okay. So for example, three types of capital receipts of the government are there. One is borrowing. Borrowing means those receipts of the government which government borrow from outside, maybe inside the country or from outside the country, to raise the fund, to finance the budget. Government may borrow. So in case of borrowing, government get income no doubt, but in case of borrowing, government's liability increases because government has to return back the money. So this is one kind of capital receipts. Here liability increases. Second capital receipt is disinvestment. Disinvestment, in other words, we can say privatization. When government sell its assets to the private sector, this is disinvestment or privatization. This is done for what? To raise the fund. When government face shortage of fund, either government may borrow from outside or inside the country, or government may disinvest, means government will sell its asset. And in case of asset selling or disinvestment, what happens? Government asset reduces because government sell its asset. Suppose government sell 50% of share of ONGC or any private sector undertaking units. That time government will raise the fund, but government asset will fall. Third one is recovery of loans. Recovery of loans. Recovery of loans and repayment of loans, these are not same. Don't mix up these two. Repayment of loan means I have taken loan, now I have returned back the money, repayment of loans. In recovery loan means when central government give assistance in terms of loans and advances to the state government or in other union territories, that time it is called recovery of loans. When the state government or union territory requires some funds, government may provide them loans or some assistance, financial assistance. This is recovery of loans. In these cases, what happens? Government asset reduces. Okay. When government raises the fund for the state government, that time government asset reduces. So these are the three types of capital receipts. So in capital receipt, either government asset will reduce or government liabilities will fall. So it increase. So these are capital receipts. So these are the income side of the government. From this revenue and capital receipt, government generate income. Now expenditure part. Government received income or money, and where government spend its income. Now government expenditure. It is also of the two types. Just like government received revenue capital receipt, here also revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Two types of government expenditure. Okay. In revenue expenditure also, there is no change in asset or liability of the government. No change. Asset also does not affect it, liability also doesn't affect it. But in capital receipt, just reverse thing happen in case of capital revenue receipt. In capital expenditure, what happen? Either government asset will increase or government liability will fall. Just reverse thing happen in case of capital expenditure. So in capital receipt. In capital receipt, either government asset will fall or liability will increase. But in capital expenditure, government asset will rise or liability will fall. Any one. But in revenue expenditure, no effect in the asset and liability status of the government. Okay. For example, revenue expenditure on salary, expenditure on scholarship or stipend, expenditure on what is called wages, expenditure on subsidy. These all are revenue expenditure, because in such expenditure government's asset liability nothing is affected, and it is regular expenditure of government, and government is bound to spend the money. Okay. Now in capital expenditure what we learned, either government asset will increase or liability will fall. For example, when government make a road or government make a school, that time government is spending money, then what happen? Government asset increases. Okay, here government spending money and asset is increasing. Liability reduction means, suppose government repay the loan, repayment of loan from RBI. Suppose government borrow from RBI, now government return back the money. That time what happened? Government is spending money, but government liability reducing. Okay, when you return back the money, our responsibility or liability reducing. So in case of capital expenditure, either government asset will increase or government liabilities will fall. Now apart from this expenditure, some other expenditure also related with the revenue and capital expenditure. Okay, 4 types of expenditure related with both the revenue and capital expenditure. First one is development expenditure. Second one is non-development expenditure. Okay, development expenditure means those expenditure of government which are directly related with the socio-economic development of the country. Okay, directly related with the socio-economic development. Suppose expenditure on education, health, school, colleges, expenditure on construction of roads, transport, communication. These all are for the directly development of the country. So such expenditure of government is development expenditure. Non-development, which was just reverse of this one. Non-development, those expenditure which government made, but it is not directly related with the socio-economic development of the country. Okay, suppose for example expenditure of defense, expenditure of police administration, subsidy, these all are non-development. It is not directly related with the development project of the country. So development, non-development. Third one is planned expenditure. And fourth one is non-planned expenditure of budget. Planned expenditure means those expenditure which were included in the earlier plan, earlier 1 year plan or earlier 5 year plan. This is planned expenditure. Or budget is already included in the current year budget. This is planned expenditure, which is already planned. Suppose expenditure on education, health. Government always keep money for such expenditure. Expenditure on education, health, defense. Government always keep some part of their expenditure on this project. These are planned expenditure. Non-planned expenditure means those expenditure which was not covered in the current 5 year plan or not covered in the current budget. This is non-planned. Due to sudden incident, government has to spend money. Suppose due to earthquake, part of the country had destroyed. Government had to reconstruct the part, or government has to reconstruct the dam destroyed in the flood. Government has to reconstruct road destroyed in the war. These all are non-planned. These are sudden incident, and government has to pay money for that. These are non-planned expenditure. So out of the expenditure, we are getting 4 extra parts. One is development, directly related with the development project. Non-development, not related with the development project. Planned expenditure covered in the current 5 year plan or current budget. Non-planned means which are not covered the current budget. So these are the government receipt and government expenditure part. From where government get the income and where government spend the money. Next part of the budget. Types of budget. Types of government budget. Generally, 2 types of budget. One is balanced budget. Another is unbalanced. Okay. Balanced budget means where government's receipt and expenditure both are equal. How much government is earning, the same amount government is spending. This is balanced budget. Unbalanced means where government receipt and expenditure are not equal. This is unbalanced budget. Government receipt or expenditure is not equal. Maybe one is more or one is less. Okay. Out of this, there are two types of unbalanced budget. One is surplus budget. Another is deficit budget. Okay. Surplus budget means where government's receipt is more than government expenditure. Means government is spending more. Government can save money. This is surplus budget. Generally in developed countries, such type of budgets are formed, either balanced or surplus budget. But country like India, we are having always deficit budget, where government's receipt is always less than its expenditure. Means our expenditure is more, our income is less. This is deficit budget. And the next part is totally based on this deficit budget. Three types of deficit budget. One is revenue deficit. One is fiscal deficit. Another is primary deficit. These are three types of deficit: revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, primary deficit. Okay. Now, revenue deficit. Deficit means receipt is always less than expenditure. This is deficit. Now, revenue deficit means when government revenue receipt is more than is less than its revenue expenditure. This is revenue deficit. When government revenue receipt is less than revenue expenditure. So we can write the formula like that: revenue deficit is equal to revenue expenditure minus revenue receipt. This is the formula of revenue deficit. This thing happen when government's revenue income is less than revenue expenditure. Second one is fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit, which one? When government's budget expenditure, total budget expenditure is more than total budget receipt. That time there is fiscal deficit. Government budget expenditure becomes more than budget receipt. In short, we can write the formula like that: fiscal deficit is equal to budget expenditure minus budget receipt excluding borrowing. Excluding borrowing. Why excluding borrowing? I am coming later. Now, in budget expenditure, what are there? Two types of budget expenditure. One is revenue expenditure, another is capital expenditure. These two together form budget expenditure. Our budget receipts also two parts. One is revenue receipt, another is capital receipt. Capital receipt excluding borrowing. Okay, borrowing comes under capital receipt. We learned earlier. Now, why excluding borrowing? Because borrowing is not permanent income of the government. When government borrow money, government has to return back the money. So we never include the borrowing in the capital receipt. So fiscal deficit occurs when budget expenditure becomes more than budget receipt. Formula is budget expenditure minus budget receipt excluding borrowing. And in budget expenditure, two types of expenditure. One is revenue expenditure, one is capital expenditure. And budget receipt, revenue receipt and capital receipt. So these are revenue deficit and fiscal deficit. Now third one. Third one is primary deficit. Primary deficit means the actual deficit of the government, of the budget. Primary deficit. Okay, when primary deficit happen, primary deficit is nothing but fiscal deficit minus interest payment. Okay, interest payment of what? Of the borrowing. We learned here borrowing. So when government borrow money, government has to return back the money along with interest. So from the fiscal deficit, if we subtract the interest payment, then we get the actual deficit of the government, that is primary deficit. So primary deficit is the difference between fiscal deficit and interest payment of the earlier loan. Okay, so these are the three types of deficit of the budget: revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, and primary deficit. Now, how government can overcome the budget deficit? Budget deficit. So we get three types of deficit. Now, if deficit happen, or how government can overcome the situation of deficit. Any kinds of deficit means government expenditure is more than receipt. Expenditure is more than receipt is deficit. So how we can overcome the problem of the deficit? First step, we have to reduce the expenditure. Okay, somehow we have to reduce the expenditure of the government. How? If government do not spend on unproductive projects, that time government expenditure will fall. If government make better planning and administration, that time also government can reduce its expenditure. This is one way how we can reduce the expenditure. Second step is, somehow we should try, if it is not possible to reduce the expenditure, then government should try to increase its receipt from various sources. Okay, either government should reduce its expenditure. If it is not possible, government should try to collect its revenue or capital receipt. That time also we can overcome the situation. Now, how to increase the receipts? Through taxation. Government can increase the existing tax rate. Government may impose new taxes. Then also government can earn more income. Government can check the situation of tax evasion. Tax evasion means tendency of non-paying of tax of the people. Tax evasion. That time also government can increase the collection of revenue. Government can increase various non-tax revenue, like fees, fines, like that. That time also government can increase the collection of taxes or collection of receipts. So these are the two systems through which we can either reduce the expenditure or we may increase the receipt. So by this we can overcome the situation of deficit of the budget. Now suppose both are impossible. Government also cannot reduce its expenditure and also cannot increase its receipt. That time what happen? Deficit means government expenditure is more than receipt. Now government is unable to reduce the expenditure also, or government also unable to increase the receipt also. That time how we can solve the problem? That time we have to borrow money. Means that time we have to finance the budget. Finance the deficit of budget. Okay, in our families also happen this thing. If we cannot reduce our expenditure or if we cannot increase our income, that time what we do? To recover the shortage of fund, we may either sell our house or we may sell our any asset or like that. By this we can collect the excess money. Government also do the same thing. When government face shortage of fund, that time government try to finance the deficit. How? 4 instruments are there. First one is monetary expansion. Monetary expansion. It is also called deficit budget. this thing done in case of deficit budget. Monetary expansion means government may print new currency note to the extent of the deficit. Okay, when government face any deficit, government borrow from the RBI, and RBI do what? RBI may either print currency notes or somehow RBI will manage the money. This is monetary expansion. Government will borrow from RBI in terms of deficit. This is monetary expansion, or government may print new currency notes. Second one is borrowing from external sources. Okay, if government is not possible, government is unable to do this thing, government may borrow from other side. Government may borrow within the country, or government may borrow from outside the country. Suppose government borrow from World Bank or International Monetary Fund or any other developed countries. This is borrowing from external sources to recover the deficit. Third one is disinvestment. Disinvestment means privatization. If government is unable to solve the problem, government may sell its asset to the private sector and generate income. This is disinvestment. To finance the deficit, government also may do this. In 1991, in the new economic policy, government followed the policy disinvestment. By this, what happened? Government raised the fund. This is our third instrument. Fourth one, public borrowing. Public borrowing means within the country, if government borrow. Suppose government borrow from private banks, or government borrow from the public through issuing bonds and securities. These are public borrowing. Within the country, government may borrow. So these are the four sources from where government finance the deficit of the budget. Monetary expansion through printing of new currency notes, borrowing from external sources, suppose World Bank, IMF, some other sources are from external countries. Disinvestment, if government sell its assets to the private sector. Public borrowing, if government borrow from the public through issuing bonds and securities. So these are the policies from where government finance the deficit. So